What's up? I'm Tyler.
And I'm Dakota.
And this is the Bourbon and Business Podcast,
where we interview successful businessmen and women to let you in on why success doesn't have a single formula to follow.
We also have a little bourbon tasting along the way, because why not?
Why not?
So guys, please enjoy this episode and let us know your thoughts at Bourbon and Business Podcast on Instagram.
Coming to you from the Bourbon and Business Studio here in the Capitol Club in downtown Jackson, Mississippi. I'm Tyler.
I'm Dakota.
And this is the Bourbon and Business Podcast. How you doing this morning, Dakota?
Great, Tyler.
You want to tell our listeners about this beautiful view we have of the Capitol Club?
I know. The view of the Capitol Club is of downtown Jackson, Mississippi. It is the premier event space down here. They've got daily lunches, networking events, networking space, parking garage. They've got it all.
Yeah. If you're not a member of the Capitol Club, you need to go online and join today. And then you want to introduce our guests to us.
I do. Today we have special guest, Mark Levine, president and partner of Epic Pivot. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
Glad to have you, Mark. And then what are we sipping on?
We're sipping on Cajun's Cut, Louisiana straight bourbon whiskey.
Yep. And I can tell you, this is definitely from Louisiana. It tastes kind of like a tire, like Goodyear. That's what I'm going with there. So,
just rubber?
No, I'm just kidding. It is a good bourbon. I'm definitely picking up some of the tire material though in it, the tar.
Okay.
You can taste that, but it's got a good burn to it. Definitely tell it's been in a barrel.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to give it though. You know, if you've been drinking bourbon for a while, you know good tasting bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm joking about the tar taste. It is a very good bourbon. I'm gonna have to give it an 8.3.
Okay.
So very good. I like the burn on it. Proof wise, we're gonna go with it's got to at least be 100 proof.
94.
So 94. Mm-hmm. So lower proof than I thought with the burn, but good bourbon. You know how much we paid for this bottle?
It was like $30-$40.
So $30-$40. A great bourbon for $30 or $40. And if you're looking to pick up a bourbon, make sure you check our sponsor out, Cheers Vineyard in Gluckstadt, Mississippi. That's where we got this bottle. They give us most of the bottles for this podcast, and they've got the best person on staff there, JT, that can lead you in the right direction. So, Mark, we appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah.
We like to always start this podcast if you would just give us your background, where you're from, and then how you got to the point of becoming the president of Epic Pivot.
Yeah, glad to give you a little background. So I'm from Alabama. I grew up in Birmingham. Of course, my parents are from Brooklyn and Queens, so I'm kind of a mix of different backgrounds. Studied business at IU, Indiana University, and lived in Chicago for a few years, and then Atlanta, basically doing mergers and acquisitions work. A lot of financial valuing of companies, helping companies sell. And then from there, I worked at Home Depot in Atlanta and did a lot of strategy and acquisitions there. So I helped them buy some companies back when they were trying to build up what was called HD Supply at the time, Home Depot Supply. And from there, ended up moving to Memphis. I married a Memphian. We decided to move to Memphis. She wanted to start a restaurant business with her family. And so we moved over here and did more strategy work at a company called Service Master here. They own True Green and Terminix, American Home Shield, or at least they did at the time, and worked with a lot of the business presidents there. I've been at Epic Pivot, formerly Southern Growth Studio, for about a dozen years now. I joined a couple of partners who started the firm in Mississippi, of all places, just in Oxford there. They were working with 4 Ole Miss professors at a company called FNC. And they helped them grow that and sell that for over $100 million. And they had some special sauce in how they grow businesses. And they decided to apply that to other businesses in the South at the time, eventually nationwide and even some global. So moved to Memphis, and they've been around. I should say we've been around for about 17 years. Worked with about 300 clients, a lot of mid-market companies, but also some brands you've probably heard of, some Fortune 500. And then a lot of nonprofits as well. We like to help everyone. So it's a little bit of background.
Well, nice. Well, tell our listeners a little bit about your background in mergers and acquisitions and how that worked as far as you making the transition over to Epic Pivot.
Yeah, so it's funny, I was helping a lot of companies basically figure out who to sell to, what would make strategic sense on it's really an acquisition is a big partnership, right? You're just making a lot of money in the process, but most of these folks want to continue on. They don't want to hang up their hat and go off into the sunset and stop working. So a lot of it is figuring out which environment makes most sense for them, who they want to work with. And I've seen so many cases of entrepreneurial types get bought by large companies and the fit just doesn't work. These big bureaucratic organizations and they're used to running and gunning and the two just don't fit. So a lot of it was around strategic fit. So we would help them figure out what's the right strategic fit for them, not just in terms of who's going to pay them the most money, but where they belong, so to speak, where they could actually see themselves working, the people they're going to work with, the culture that they're going to be a part of. All that was critical. And then the same thing on the buy side, when I was at Home Depot and ServiceMaster, a lot of times we're like, this person is just not going to fit our culture. They're just not the right fit for us. And so we would walk away from some deals just because we knew that we needed the founder of the business to continue on with us. And if it wasn't going to work, then it was just going to be, it's almost like you need a prenup, it's just, it wasn't going to work in the long run. So that's it kind of helped me figure out strategically, you start figuring out not only from an acquisition perspective, but how did they get to this point and what did they do strategically to grow their business? And so the strategy aspect just became an obvious fit from there. And frankly, I enjoy helping people grow value of their businesses rather than just sell when it's time to sell. So it was a natural career evolution for me.
You've also got this ability that you've probably had to develop to read people, right? Like to know if they're going to be a good fit or not. Like you can tell from their past, sure, but when they're sitting across from you in a room, what's their sense of humor? Are they going to fit with a culture? What is their structure like? It's kind of like, oh, they've never worked on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That's probably not going to fit with a Home Depot culture of like we're open every day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be a skill that you can stack, so to speak.
For sure. No, that's a great insight. It's funny. That also applies on the consulting side. We like to help all people, but we can just tell when an organization is kind of closed off and they think they need an outside, somebody on their team thinks they need help, but maybe the CEO hasn't quite come along for the ride. And you can just kind of sense when the culture is sort of resistant to change. And we're like, hey, this probably isn't going to be a great client for us.
Yeah.
You read people, you also read organizations. So that makes a lot of sense.
Well, on that topic, because we have a lot of business owners that listen to this, say there's a business owner they're out there and they're saying, hey, I want to make sure my company's in the best position to be acquired. What are some things that they can be doing outside of obviously getting a consulting firm like you? What are some practical things they can do to make sure that they can get the best value for their company when that time comes?
Yeah, great question. I'm a big fan of this book called E-Myth or the E-Myth, and one of his big pieces of advice is to work on the business, not in the business. If you find that you're spending the majority of your time in your business, chances are you're critical to the growth and success of your business. And that makes it a lot less saleable. So, when someone comes in and they acquire your business, if they're completely dependent on you and there's a chance that you might have a heart attack the next day or whatever, there goes a lot of the value of the business, right? That's a lot of risk for the acquirer to take on. So what you want to do is get your business to the point where it's running with great people, a great management team, and you're there almost like the conductor. You're kind of guiding, you're looking for the next growth opportunity. You're not there in the business on a day-to-day basis, actively making sure that, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that is a key component of it. Another is that there's a lot of growth opportunity. So if you say, man, we got 95% of the market share and we're doing about as good as we can possibly do. Well, the buyer's basically buying full value of your business. And they're like, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to actually grow it over time? Yeah. So you want to make sure that there's some good growth opportunities too. That's just a couple of watch outs.
I think those are some good insight there though.
Yeah. And you talked about culture, it being a key driver and when you're looking for a business, if we're going to do this deal or not. How can companies create a good culture and a culture that's scalable?
Yeah, great question. And, it's amazing how much the first 10 people in an organization, the first 15 people of an organization set the culture. We've seen this over and over again. we've worked with people who started a company in their dorm room in college and grew it to $50 million. And you can see the culture is just completely innate based on just the person who started the business, because you can just sense it, right? So a lot of it is making sure that there's open communication, and that, there's, in a sense, you're not, setting it up where it's command and control and it's everything has to be done one way, because then it's not organic, right? It's not something that is coming from the bottom up. So what we like to do when we go into organizations is get a sense for what people think in the organization, how they would like to see it run better. And so what we call that voice of the employee. And there's a lot of customer research out there where people get the voice of the customer. We do a ton of that work as well. But there's not as much voice of the employee work. People take these surveys of their employees. How do you think, rate this company on a scale 1 to 10, and then, fill in the blank on what you would like to see change. That's not going to quite get it done, we see, from a cultural standpoint. Because people, a lot of times you really need to dive into a 30-minute, sometimes 60-minute conversation with employees to really get to the bottom of what it is that they love about the organization and what it is they think that really needs to improve. The last thing I'll say is, when it comes to culture, and this is becoming a buzzword which didn't exist five years ago, psychological safety. If people can't bring their whole selves to work every day, and they're to sort of compartmentalize their work selves from their home selves, then they're not going to be really loving their job. They might make some good money. They might like some of the people they work with, but if they feel like they have to put a mask on when they walk into work every day, that's probably not going to be a good culture in the long run. It's not going to be a place that draws talent to the organization.
That's a great point. And, those kinds of things are it's part of the growth of the organization now to cater to the younger generation, or, whatever the new buzzword is in the industry. There's always going to be some new progress being made regarding mental health or physical health in some way. And you've got to be able to adapt and change and cater to that if you want to stay on the forefront of being that inclusive company culture, because otherwise, as soon as you get labeled in today's world, you're done. If you get labeled the wrong thing, your growth is over. And it completely rebranding like that is going to be extremely difficult. So, but tell us a little bit about human-centered insights, and how do you make that happen? Because I feel like that's kind of along the same lines.
No, it is. And that's really our calling card as an organization. People come to us to get into what we call the mind of the audience that they're solving for. So we get into the mind, and I just alluded to this a second ago. What do your customers really think? What are their real needs? What is their journey? How did they get to you?
Mm-hmm.
How do they think about you versus the competition? Why would they buy from you versus the competition? On the employee side, why are they working there? And people these days can work a lot of places. Why did they choose this organization? What makes you different? What needs to change? So what we do a lot of is deep, in-depth interviews where we, in a sense, peel the onion back. Surveys are great when you kind of know the questions you want to ask and you just want to get a quantitative sense for where the majority lies.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to get into the heart of what somebody thinks, you need to spend more time with the person that you're trying to solve for. So this all came out of design thinking, which was started at Stanford University, the D school there. There's a company called IDEO out in Silicon Valley that worked with all the big tech companies, and eventually a company called Steelcase, which acquired them. But what they do and what we do is practice a lot of their principles, which is a 5-step process called the design thinking process. And it starts with deep empathy, which is what I was just describing. Then making sure you're defining the problem correctly, then brainstorming solutions, then prototyping those solutions, and then testing those solutions. And so testing means going back and saying, hey, is this what you meant, person I'm solving for? Is this going to solve your problem? A lot of folks begin with the brainstorming process. They think they know the problem, but a vast number of problems, they've defined the problem the wrong way. And so if you don't start with who you're solving for, you might end up solving the wrong problem, which won't get you where you want to go. So I hope that helps.
No, yeah, for sure. That's some good word there.
And what would you say to the company out there that says, hey, maybe we do have a massive problem. Maybe we do have a big culture problem. How are you able to come in and kind of turn the ship around?
Well, the first question we always start with is, why do you think you have a problem? A lot of times people come to us with a problem, and we find out that the problem they think they have is really not, that's one slice of the bigger problem, right? Maybe they didn't define it. And that goes back to what I was just talking about. So the first thing we do is we make sure that we're solving the right problem. And so, we'll have a meeting. Sometimes we have a workshop with these folks where we make sure that the problem that they think they need to solve is the problem that they actually need to solve. And that is, some people don't like to hear that. They say, no, we know what it is. And, sometimes we'll just go in there and do that. But we want to make sure that we're solving the right problem. And then from there, what we do is it's really an iterative process. So I mentioned the human-centered insights part of this. What we also do a lot of is secondary research and expert research. So we look at the market, the trends, we look at competitors and how they're going to market. And a lot of times from the strategy side, what we'll do is we'll say, well, it's got to be three things. It's got to be something that's true to you, meaning it's something that's really innate in your organization. But it's also got to be differentiated in the market, and it's got to be something that resonates with your audience, meaning it really solves their problem. If you hit on all three of those things, chances are you're going to have a successful vision, a successful strategy. If you don't, then, let's say a competitor's already doing it. They'll say, well, why do I need to work with you when this other organization is already 5 years ahead of you? Or, hey, that's something that you think you need, and it's something the others aren't doing, but maybe the customer doesn't really need it that badly. Mm-hmm. So you get the idea. It's got to really hit on all of those things. So we make sure that the solutions we come up with really check all those boxes.
And what are some of the biggest problems that you're seeing companies face today?
A lot of them are dealing with so much change right now, right? Mm. So it's a hard question to answer because it's industry specific. If you're dealing with a product company that's importing from China, they're dealing with how am I going to onshore and deal with the tariff situation. If you're dealing with a technology company and it's a SaaS business, well, AI can create a SaaS business practically overnight now. So do I need to go buy a SaaS business? Did the value of that SaaS business go away because AI can basically take that overnight? So there's so many different challenges there. A lot of it is industry specific. What we see a lot of right now is that organizations are having to deal with changing consumer perceptions. And so how do you please everybody when everybody's in their own tribe? And so, being authentic and not frankly pissing somebody off in the process is a real challenge these days. So I would say that that's one of the main things. And then just a lot of folks are enamored with AI, which is great. I think of AI as a tool. I don't think of it as a solution to every problem. You've got to define the problem and think about how AI fits into that problem, not, okay, what's my AI strategy? AI has got to fit into a larger strategy. If it doesn't, if you're just saying, how can we use AI? You're probably asking the wrong question.
And everybody thinks they're using AI, and they're like, yeah, we do this, we do that, blah, blah, blah. And I was just recently listening to a podcast with Simon Sinek on the Diary of a CEO, and he gives a great rundown of the difference in humanity and AI and like where the disconnect is. And he also basically lays it out like, AI is great. It's fantastic. Like, I think we can use it to do things, but the error of humanity is what makes humanity beautiful. And he lays it out in this like picture of all these companies think they're using AI, and they're just like, if it's a chatbot or something on your website, it's like, are you really using it? That's you're just using like a little chatbot that you linked some FAQs into. It's not like actually super helpful with that. And then they go into Sam Altman and AGI or whatever it's called, generative AI, and being like self-autonomous and whatnot, and all the different buzzwords and things that go around with AI. But as far as a business strategy standpoint, yes, it's a great tool to be used. Do you want it to actually replace your people, though? That's going to be a very interesting conversation going forward as far as like what it looks like, and are people actually going to be okay talking to an AI agent on the phone that sounds like a real person, that interacts like a real person, but is not, like, because there's never an error, right, in how they speak. They never stutter. They never say up. There's no awkward pauses. Like, everything is precise and down to a science. So will people enjoy interacting with that? I don't know. It remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think we're heading toward what I call a crisis of authenticity, right?
Yeah.
You see it everywhere. Can I believe what this email is telling me? Is this a real email or not? Is this a real video or not? So we've had a crisis of truth. What is truth? We're also going to have this crisis of authenticity. Is somebody just fake, is this fake or real?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think it will set the companies apart too that are real. The ones that you can call in, and if you have an issue, you have a human on the phone that can make an exception, because all situations are not the same, and there's no way a AI is going to be able to hear the story and to understand the full scope of it and to be able to make that decision. It is going to be just trained, like we said, it doesn't make an error. No, this is what we do. From a consumer standpoint, that's an issue. If I call in and I can't really get an exception on something, there needs to be an exception, then that leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
With like a mortgage company or a life insurance company or anything like that, like if you have a national chain and you're calling in and or even a car insurance company and you've had a wreck and you have to call a 1-800 number, there's nothing worse than sitting there on hold waiting for a robot to answer. And you're like, I have to explain to you a situation. I need you to empathize with me. And I cannot do that with a robot. So that's going to be really interesting too.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I think we've all been in those situations where we want to throw the phone because come on, we get a live human here.
Representative. Clicking zero. Representative.
Exactly.
Well, tell us a little bit about, so how can companies, a lot of companies are out there operating just how they always have. How can they tell that maybe they do have an issue and maybe need to bring a company in like Epic Pivot to help solve a problem?
Yeah, we come in a lot of situations where there's something that's stagnant, the culture's stagnant, there's growth stagnant. We come in and we figure out something, if something needs to change, we're great at identifying what that is and a pathway to go act on it. So if you're in an organization where it's humming along and everybody's doing well, you may not need Epic Pivot. And frankly, our name can be a little misleading because not every pivot needs to be an epic one, right? We could have just called ourselves Pivot, but that maybe it would be a little less exciting. But no, some organizations need to really change because they got to react to just completely changing, times, and what got them to here isn't going to get them to the next phase 5 years. And others just need to tweak, but either way, what they're seeing is something that's either stagnant or not working as well as it used to.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about some of the big projects you've worked on, maybe some of the big companies you've worked with?
Maybe an Epic Pivot.
Sure. So we've worked with we've worked with over 300 organizations. So a lot of them people have never heard of. Our sweet spot is this mid-market organization, I'd say. We also work with some nonprofits as well. We like to pay it forward that way. But some of the organizations people have heard of: FedEx, Fruit of the Loom, Coppertone, Cardinal Health, Allstate, St. Jude Hospital, Jack Nicklaus, the golfer. I guess That's an interesting story. We actually met Jack at his memorial tournament there in Columbus, Ohio. So that was fun. I'll tell you that story real quick. It's kind of interesting. Jack was basically licensing his name to a bunch of, frankly, third-rate products for easy. When we met him and his organization. He had just taken on an investor named Howard Milstein, who runs a private equity fund, as well as the largest family-owned bank in New York. So Howard Milstein's a billionaire, huge Jack Nicklaus fan, bought a half stake in Jack's business because he loved Jack and wanted to continue Jack's business. And, they were basically chasing easy money. And we said, whoa, wait a second. Jack, what does Jack stand for? He stands for greatness. He stands for being the best, right? He was a consummate family man. If you talk to a golfer of a certain age, they think of Jack Nicklaus as like the embodiment of what everybody looks up to. Mm-hmm. And putting his name on products that people don't look up to. And so we took a deep look at like what the brand stood for and what products are on there and what products it should frankly be on. Should it be on a third-rate refrigerator or Sub-Zero? Those are the types of things we were looking at. And we changed his branding strategy and actually helped him come up with a brand position around the name Golden Bear, which was his nickname, that would enable them to really build a lifestyle brand around Jack. We actually got to present that in New York at Howard Milstein's office there in Manhattan. It was a real career full circle moment for me because I found out that my former CEO at Home Depot, Bob Nardelli, was working at the firm and I didn't know it. And they're like, oh, you used to work with Home Depot. Hey, let's go bring Bob in here. And I'm like, who's Bob? They're like, Bob Nardelli. I'm like, so
the Bob.
And I shook his hand and he's like, yeah, I remember you, and I was probably I was right out of MBA school at the time. So that was a real career circle moment for me about a dozen years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's
really cool.
fantastic.
Shows you how small the world actually
Yeah,
is.
it really is.
Yeah,
It really is.
exactly.
Well, Dakota, I think it's a good time for a bourbon break.
Yeah, man.
Give us your thoughts on it.
Very spicy. Cajun's cut. I mean, if you taste it, you're like, whoa, this is feels like they put some Tony Chachere's in there or something. Some some Louisiana spice. It's high heat for what was it, a 94 proof? I mean,
Yeah.
It tastes like a 110, 115, honestly. So it's a little too hot flavor wise for me. So I'm gonna land it at 8.0.
8.0.
Yeah.
So, I mean, good bourbon.
Yeah, it's still not a bad bourbon by any means, but just not what I'm looking for my palate.
Well, tell our listeners a little bit, what's the future look like for Epic Pivot?
Well, we're leaning into some of this AI stuff. We're figuring out how you can bring the human into the technology. So we've been having a lot of those conversations. But really what we want to do is help these smaller organizations scale. So we're starting to go a little bit smaller with some of the folks we're working with and, really thinking about how we can partner with them for a longer term and really help these organizations grow. It's a lot of the similar type work we're doing, but thinking about it in slightly a smaller organization way and thinking about how we integrate technology into what we're doing. So it's a lot of it.
Fantastic.
And tell our listeners, what is the best way for them to get in touch with Epic Pivot?
Yeah, so you'll see us on epicpivot.com, but you'll also feel free to email me. I'm at mark@epicpivot.com. And that's probably the best way to do it. You'll see an email address when you go there. There's also, if you don't want to just email me directly, there's hello@epicpivot.com, and that'll go to our business development people.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we appreciate you coming on today. To all our listeners, go get you a bottle of Cajun Cut at Cheers Vineyard in Gluckstadt. And however you stream this podcast, if you will give us a rating and follow us on social media, and we will see you next week.
Hope you guys enjoyed this episode.
If you have any feedback or would like to be featured, reach out to us at bourbonandbusinesspodcast@gmail.com.
Or find us on Instagram at Bourbon and Business Podcast.
Thanks again for listening.
Follow us for more content and info on the next episode.